this computer, so we are good to go on that front.
Right.
You are free to ask me anything within reason.
Well,
I say within reason because I told my mother that I was doing this, and she said anything. and I suddenly thought, oh no, not anything. So anything Writerly or Worcestershire Poet Laureate related.
So really, with the recording on, I better behave myself.
Yes, please don't swear or make it.
No, I don't. I never swear.
You are live.
Yeah, you are live on a stream broadcast.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Oh, it'll come back, I'm sure.
It'll come back. I'll leave it to someone else.
People might not have questions.
Well, what's been your most memorable moment?
Oh God. That's a very good question, and I went into
a big one, I know.
Yeah, it really is. I think my favourite moment was when I went into RGS The Grange, and I judged their school poetry competition, where the whole school, all the way through from the teeny tiny ones that are about this big, the whole school has to pick a poem that's already been published, and they learn it by heart. And they have heats in their classrooms to kind of get like a short list for each year, and then each year has to perform that piece live in front of the little school for the younger ones, and then in front of the older years for the older ones. And I went in on the day of their shortlist judging, and I just sat and watched these like year 5 students like belt out Edgar Allan Poe like it was nothing, and these year 4s cracking out Shakespeare's witches poems, and I just thought, how is this happening? And it was just the loveliest way to spend a morning, and I also found it really encouraging that there are, I don't know, pockets of people that are still celebrating writing like that.
That's lovely.
I felt like I had like a very good education, and no one ever said let's learn some poetry as part of it. So I think it's really nice to see that happening.
Yeah.
Leading on from that, Charley, is being able to recite poetry, learning poetry by heart, do you think that's important? Because that's something I've been rubbish at. Even my own stuff.
I used to think it was really important, essential in fact. There was a time when I first started performing that I wouldn't do anything unless I could do it off by heart, and it's just not for me, and I think that's fine. There are some poets who I know of who can belt out like 3-4 minute poems, and I think that's a wonderful skill, but I also think that's a type of poetry, and I don't think possessing that skill or not possessing that skill is necessarily a deal breaker for other types of poetry. And I think there are actually some, I don't know, poetry families, for want of a more technical term, that work really well when someone reads them from a book, and can give you that kind of like almost a story time experience of that shared narrative. So I think there are certain types of poetry where I would say, please don't get up with 7 sheets of A4 and read to us from one continuous never-ending verse for 5 minutes, because that's a pocket of performance poetry, which isn't better or worse than page poetry, it's just different.
Charley,
yes,
sort of following on from Nicola's question, but bringing it very firmly into the realms of the competition. I know that one of the former Poet Laureates subscribed to the idea that in order to win poetry competitions, you had to write in a certain way that was appealing to competition judges and would write a poem for a competition in a different way than they might have written it had it been simply a page poem or simply a performance poem. Have you got any views on that?
Oh God, I mean, this is really tricky because I know a lot of the previous laureates, but I don't agree with that statement at all. I didn't feel like I needed to do that for Worcestershire Poet Laureate. I will confess, I'm quite good at sending things out to journals and magazines and things, but I tend not to send stuff to competitions because it just makes me itchy. But for the Worcestershire Poet Laureate competition, I submitted a piece that I liked, and because I'm obsessed with flowers, I submitted a piece about a sunflower forest, and I don't remember ever thinking, oh very nice, very nice accompaniment, Paul.
Yes, please.
Yeah, hand those
Thank
out.
you, Lucy.
Wow.
And
What a delivery.
I don't remember ever thinking, oh, I better not do that, or I better make sure I do that.
You see, I did challenge the idea at the time.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't I? And sort of said, well, what exactly do you mean by that? How would you suggest that one writes in a different manner for a competition than you would normally write your poetry? And there was no real response to that. So I think I don't know whether it was for effect, I'm not sure, but it made me think, and it's obviously stuck in my mind. So I thought it was worth asking the question.
I think, I mean, had I subscribed to that belief system and kind of employed that for the competition, I don't think that I would feel like I'd won on merit. Do you know, if someone were judging me for having written something in a style that I thought they would like, but a style that was different to the style I ordinarily write, I would think, well, they're not accepting me because of how I write, they're accepting me because
it's too contrived, isn't it?
Yeah, it just feels like a very convoluted way to go about writing poetry. And on my best days, I find it difficult enough.
To yourself.
Say again, sorry, Anne.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No,
and you'd feel like you weren't being true to yourself.
No, exactly.
No, I think that the poet's authentic voice is something that has to come across in whatever poem they write, truly. And I can't, I don't know, I think sometimes people overanalyze what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I also don't think I could have submitted a piece that I wasn't confident with. You know, if I was second guessing what the judges would want over what I wanted, I mean, presumably the judges would have perhaps liked something more strict to the theme of pathways, whereas I was like, oh no, flowers. let's try flowers instead. And I think, you know, like, for the purpose of fitting to the theme, like, you cater your style and your interest with what it is that you've been asked to write about. But I mean, to take that principle to the extreme, if the remit had been write a sonnet as part of your competition submission, I would have said, okay, well, sonnets aren't really for me, so this isn't my year. I don't think I could have bent things quite so severely to try and second guess what another person would need from my writing. Aid.
Who are the poets who've inspired you?
I've had a woman crush on Caroline Duffy for as long as I can remember. Nicola's like, yes, that's a fair statement. I fell in love with Caroline Duffy's writing when I was doing my A-levels, and I think up until that point I'd read a lot of First World War and Second World War poetry, which isn't problematic but is slightly limiting in terms of the palette that you're given during your GCSEs and your A-levels, although I'm sure it was much more varied than that, but they're the things that kind of stuck. So when I read I can't remember if it's called Onion or Love is Like an Onion, but Carol Ann Duffy has a love poem in which love becomes an onion, and I thought, oh my god, this is amazing. how is this happening? So Carol Ann Duffy was hugely influential, and then I remember being at university in Bristol, and I think it was my first or second year of my undergraduate, and one of our lecturers showed us a YouTube video of Byron Vincent performing poetry, and I'd never seen anything like it in my entire life. And from that point I kind of binged on performance poets, and I eventually became like a huge fan of people like Neil Hilborn and Rudy Francisco, but then I found out that Worcester had a poetry scene, and that was just a game changer, because there are loads of local poets who have been really influential as well. She'll squeal if she reads this, but Claire Walker's poetry is just next level. And collaborating with her has been amazing. Even editing with her is amazing. So I find Claire's work really wonderful to read and to learn from. She's going to cringe, so I'm going to cover her square. But I find Polly's work wonderful to learn from, and not so much poetry, although she will edit my poetry in a few months' time, but being edited by Polly when I was working on The Women You Were Warned About was huge as well. So yeah, local and global poets. You were right, Paul. Do you need it? So yeah.
I'll unmute myself now because I was eating squashes, and it's all a bit sort of sloshy, isn't it? Eating squashes. But that's very, very, very kind of you to say all those nice things, Charlie. And I believe in encouraging people and giving feedback that is constructive.
Yeah.
And I think that probably is why I have very rarely had people who object to being edited by me. So thank you for that. It's lovely of you.
Oh God, I forgot that we'd edited together as well. So yeah, that's another reason why Polly's an inspirational woman, for showing me how to edit and how to slyly edit. suggest edits.
Good suggestions are a good way forward, I think.
Yes, very much so. Yes, editing is in itself a collaborative process, I think.
Indeed.
Claire and I are currently working on something. I won't give it away, and we're having regular editing check-ins, and I had, because I'm doing lots of marking, I was in marking mode when I read through the poems that we'd already looked at, and we hopped onto Zoom so I could do a screen share, and she saw what I'd done and she said, "Oh Christ, you really have edited them, haven't you?" And I said, "Yes, but mine more so than yours, because yours are your own."
There was a red pen involved.
That's a good get out clause, that is, Charlie.
Yes, Paul.
Charlie, you know, you were saying earlier when we were talking about poet's voice, that if you'd been asked to write a sonnet, you would probably not have entered a competition if it had been about a sonnet. But just thinking about poets' voices, do you think that? I'm not sure how to put this. What I'm trying to get at is if you write a sonnet or a sestina or a villanelle or any of the forms of poetry, pantoum or anything like that, do you believe that you can still hear the poet's voice, or do you believe that the poet's voice is constrained by form? That's the question, really. Are poets' voices constrained by form? That's what I'd like to know.
No, I don't think they are.
No, I don't either.
No, I really don't think that they are. I had my first encounter with a triolet. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Oh, triolet, I love them, yes.
I had my first encounter with one of those recently, and it was the first time. Nicola, I'll send you a WikiHow guide. Honestly, it's something else. Honestly, for a poem that repeats itself so frequently, it's remarkably difficult to write.
They're horrendous, Nicola, but once you've got it, oh my God, the sense of achievement is
satisfying experience.
incredible.
I wouldn't even know how to spell it, let alone.
I had my first experience of writing one of those, and oh goodness, I'm paraphrasing the topic of it now, but it was effectively something about how to make a woman feel good, or how to make a woman value herself, or something along those lines. And to say that X amount of the lines were repeated, so there was only so much room for kind of variation on the theme that I was employing and variation on the lines that I was using. I think people who know my poetry style well could read that and say, oh yeah, that's something that Charley would write about, or oh yes, that's something that Charley would have done. So I think even though I felt constrained as I was writing it, in terms of what I enjoy writing about and what I value writing about, that didn't change at all from whether that had been a free-form poem to whether it was a triolet. And they're actually great fun, I think, once you get them, aren't they, Polly?
Oh, I think they're brilliant. It's only 8 lines. That's the wonderful thing about a triolet. It's spelled Trio, like trio, and then LET at the end, Nicola.
Thank you.
But all of the lines are iambic pentameter, so it's all heartbeat stuff. Da 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 da, which is lovely. And you only have 8 syllables in each line. And then the 1st, 4th and 7th line are identical. And the 2nd and the final lines are identical.
Wow.
Now, what that actually means is that the first line and the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines are couplets. They're the same.
Right.
So they're the same. I mean, it sounds terribly complex, but it isn't really. Once you start realizing that you can use the same lines again, it becomes quite interesting.
Is it one of those things that is harder to explain than actually do? Well, no, it's not hard to do, but
it really is.
I'll tell you what, I'll put a note of that in chat, because I can see people putting stuff in chat, aren't they? Would you like a note of that?
Yeah, go on.
You've found my weak spot now. My weak spot is always form in poetry, because I just love it.
Have you heard of poets who say that form is constricted to voice, Polly?
No, not particularly, I don't think. Although, I mean, you've got, it's a very split camp, isn't it? Because you've got people like Stephen Fry, who won't have open verse under any circumstances. He thinks it's a total waste of space. Although I kind of think that that's just a stance that he's adopted to sell his book, The Ode Less Travelled. And I think that he probably has got plenty of time for open verse. However, equally, you get people like, you get performance poets who don't like page poetry, and you get page poets who don't like performance poetry, and then you get people like Oakley, who I think is wondrous. He was the Young Poet Laureate a couple of years ago, and he just says, but there's no difference. No. If you can put it on a page, then you can read it. So it's a performance poem. And I think I subscribe to that as much as anything else. But I'm sure there will be people who write open verse who have no time. Well, I know there are people who write open verse who have no time for form in poetry at all, because they find it constraining. Yeah. But to me, it's that very shaping of a poem that allows me the freedom within those constraints to put something that for me becomes more meaningful. Yeah. And I get a great sense of achievement if I've actually managed to use a form to say what I want to say
Yeah.
within those constraints. That for me is an achievement. I think that's why I love it so much. Yeah.
I know that I will come to you in 2 seconds, Tim, because I'm about to borrow from your earlier point.
Okay.
Tim mentioned earlier the challenge of the writing a haiku a day, which I know, Polly, you mentioned in the Dear Listener group on Thursday. What is time? Kind of distant cousin from haiku is tanka, which is another form of kind of restricted syllabic poetry, and there's a lot of variation on how the lines can be structured rather, which I'm sure is the same with haiku depending on who you ask. But tanka is also a very compact amount of syllables, and when I'm really struggling to understand something in life, I will write it in a tanka. And I remember, oh goodness me, two and a half years ago, perhaps a little bit longer, my grandfather was rushed into hospital and had to have brain surgery. There was a bleed on the brain, which I think was actually one of two, and they kind of found evidence of the first one as they were looking for the second. And he would have been mid-80s at the time, so it was all, a lot to be contending with, and the various stages of it being found and it being diagnosed, him then being treated, us waiting for the phone call during the operation, all of that sort of stuff kind of strung out into a tanka sequence, because bit by bit it just felt like too much to process. But if I could compact it into 5 lines or a very long sentence, depending on the sorts of structure I was using, if I could compact it down into a limited amount of syllables, suddenly it made more sense, because it was just this small nugget of information rather than this huge life event happening around me. So yeah, Polly, I'd absolutely take your point on sometimes being able to put things inside a form box, as it were, can sometimes be really helpful in dealing with certain subjects, I think.
I think there are probably some subjects that don't lend themselves to a particular form.
No.
But you find out with trial and error. I mean,
very much so.
At the moment, I've got a U3A group who are for the second year running studying form in poetry with me, and they just love the challenge. So, so I get a great deal out of that. It's lovely. I love those workshops. So sorry if I've sort of taken it over a little bit, but I just wanted to know what your response would be to that.
No, not at all. I would love to come. You should run a form workshop just for people to sign up to, because I would come to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Just putting that out there.
Polly.
It's an interesting one. I mean, I'd love to, but how on earth would I select a particular form? I suppose I'd just have to go for my favourite one, wouldn't I? Because you couldn't just say, let's have a workshop about form in poetry, because there are hundreds, if not thousands of them.
I mean, the easiest way around that would be to just do a series of workshops.
Yeah.
Form a week.
Well, one day perhaps, we'll see.
Tim, did you remember your question?
Going back to performing, I remember the first time I sort of went in for the Poet Laureate at the Swan Theatre, and I think I was still learning then, and I'm still learning now. I don't think anyone ever stops learning. I don't believe in that. But I sort of went up on stage, and that's the first time I've been up on stage since I was a school kid, which seems quite a long time, about 10 years or so. But, it was, I felt that I wrote it, the actual poem, but I don't think I had enough practice for the night of performing it.
Right.
So I think ever since then, I sort of get up there, I sort of stand in the bedroom, and I'll read it, and I'll read it and read it and read it over again. 9 times out of 10, I must probably redo it. But it just goes to show, really, this thing about people not performing their work. I can't find it very hard to believe that, because when they're writing it, surely they've got to sort of think, well, if they're going to write that poem, people have got to read it and sort of think, well, it doesn't sound right to me. If you get what I mean. And sometimes I go up on stage before, and I might be a bit short of breath on that night or something like that, or I don't breathe properly. And that, some E.O. Osborne has pulled me up on this before now. I think Polly has. It's getting the control of the reading, and that's why I feel that when you're writing, just go over it again and again, like you are on stage, because otherwise, it might sound all right to you. It might be okay, but it just gives you that practice to sort of make it sound right. I just wish I had the voice of many poets that I enjoy listening to. Matt Jones is one of my favourites, and he had this sort of smooth voice. Idris Elba is a smashing voice, and they can, when they read their words, it comes out so sort of silk quiet, and I find that's very inspiring for me to write that sort of poem.
But then I think part of Matt Jones's delivery, for example, is that Matt has a poetry persona. Like he has a beautiful spoken voice just to sit and have a conversation with, of course. But how he articulates himself on stage is not how he articulates himself during conversation.
No, but that's what I mean, though. See, really, when you're writing a sort of thing like poetry, I think it's very inspiring to have that sort of way of, reading it. He's obviously going to read his lines and recite his lines. That's why I wish I had, I was able to recite. I'm not very good at reciting. I have to admit that, whether it's age or not. But it's
not age, Tim. I'm 27 and I can't do it, so I wouldn't really do that.
Thank God for that. Polly is another good one.
Yes, see? Polly, is there something that you want to?
Well, it was going back to math, actually, because I was privileged to be at one of his workshops. I think it was even before you came on the poetry scene, Charlie. He did a number of workshops for Litfest when I was involved with Litfest all those years ago, and I can remember him doing one about using the microphone and performing with a microphone, and he showed people where to stand and advised them not to go up to the microphone and say, "Can you hear me?" And of course everybody can, so everybody goes, "Yeah." And he said then what a lot of people do, they step back from the microphone and now nobody can hear them, and they don't understand that this happens. But, so that was one of his things, don't do that. But the other thing was, use the poem that you're reading as the way to read the poem. In other words, if it's a soft and lilting poem, be soft and lilting. If it's a marching about poem, then feel free to march about. But if it's not a marching about poem, don't just walk up and down the stage for no real reason. And he kind of went through all of that side of presenting your own poems, and that lived with me because he made it so real, you know, for all the people that were there. Were you there, Tim, for that one? I can't remember.
Yeah.
He was brilliant, wasn't he?
Yeah, I was as well.
Who said that? Who was that?
Hans was.
Me.
Oh.
Yeah, I came to that as well.
Were you? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was ages ago, wasn't it? I have a feeling it was somewhere.
Yeah.
Wasn't it at the Pavilion in the Park, when the Pavilion in the Park was there? I think it was in their back room there, from memory. Yeah, ages ago. It was, and Tana was there, so that's how long ago it is.
Yeah, gosh.
Yeah.
It was an upstairs room somewhere.
Oh, right. Oh, well.
I
Yeah,
think
somewhere else then.
I think there's a lot to be said for having who you are as a writer and who you are as a reader, which seems like an awfully trite and artistic thing to say. But so Tim, how you've said you read things and you reread things and you go over and over and over them ahead of performing them. I don't know that when we sit and reread things to see how they sound or to make sure that we know a sentence in advance of saying it is necessarily the same as like giving it the same amount of welly that we would give on stage.
Well, the thing is, I suppose everyone's different, and I feel that I like to sort of perform it. I was, like I said, I've been inspired by Polly reads in such a way as you do, and Leanna.
Yes.
They have this way of bringing out words and things like that, and I find it difficult. So I most probably have to, do that. I have to work on it most probably a little bit harder than others because I like mine to come across, quite well.
Have you tried gin?
Sorry? Have I tried what?
I said, have you tried gin?
Gin?
Yeah.
Gin.
A sort of inhibition.
Yes,
relief.
that's exactly what it is. It just
It's a lubricant, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is, Paul. Yeah.
It's a lubricant.
Yeah.
Recommended.
Good for the vocal cords ahead of performing. Gargle with it, brush your teeth with it, everything.
I must try that.
Bathe in it.
Nicola, sorry, did you have a proper question, Nicola? Before I start my midday drinking.
Before we went off down the gin tangent. It was just a thought about the performing, and I'm still quite new to the whole writing side of things. But I've had many more years as a choral singer sort of thing. So I suppose what I try to do is apply the same sort of ideas, like when you're sort of singing a piece of music, you have certain places where you're supposed to breathe. There's good breathing points. There's gaps. Because quite often the gaps are the most important part in the line, because of the emphasis or whatever. And so, there's a crescendo or there's a pause. So many, I've not been to that many, but a lot of the spoken word events that I've been to, the difference between somebody who actually gets their poem across really well and somebody who perhaps takes away a little bit from the end is the one who stands at the end and has a moment's silence and a pause, and everyone waits and goes, is it finished? Before they and they have a chance to actually kind of go, yeah. But so many people you see, they throw away the last line and they just instantly shuffle off, and it's like you just kind of like you built it all up, and then you've done yourself a disservice there, and it's kind of having the confidence to do that. But for me, that would come from, that's what you do at the end of, if you're singing a song, you don't just stop. You get to the end, and there's like, you have to, you wait for the music to dissipate. You just give everyone a moment.
I remember on the day of the Worcestershire Poet Laureate competition, after I had read my two pieces, none other than Rod Griffiths came over to have a chat with me about my delivery, and he critiqued the way that I delivered my last line. Yeah, it's fine because I think I was a cup of wine down by that point, so I took it really well. But I remember him discussing where I let the emphasis fall on my last line versus where I should have let the emphasis fall on my last line. Not actually in my themed poem, but in the poem that I had chosen to put forward as kind of my supporting poem. but yeah, so last line delivery is hugely important. And when I read it again, I took his advice, and 2 cups of wine down, I asked whether I'd done it better. And Rod's told me that I was getting there, but by then I'd won the competition.
I thought he was going to say, I didn't hear the last word, it was too slurred.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, Charlie, one of your strengths is the way that you enunciate. You're very clear, and not everybody has that ability to be as clear in their delivery as the audience would like them to be. Let me put it that way. Yeah,
I think it's very important whether you're using a microphone or not, but obviously I run Dear Listener where we don't have a microphone, and I really don't want us to have to get a microphone, because I think it makes life easier for some people not having one, but when you kind of acclimatise yourself to addressing an audience without a microphone, you have to be clear, because there are people, 20 people back, that need to be able to hear you whether you've got a microphone or not. And the same, it's probably something that's carried over from teaching. You're always trying to make sure that your voice reaches the kids on the back row, the young adults on the back row, doing themselves a disservice by referring to it. But yeah, so I think it's important to have clear enunciation. Comes from telling people off, that's what it is, Paul.
Well, I have to agree, because of years in a it's that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of it is from that. Yeah. And of course, for math, it's his drama training, isn't it? And that's what he uses to great effect.
Throwing his voice and
I think it's very easy for Matt to have I don't say it's very easy for him to discredit him by any stretch. I think it's a real talent that he has, but I think having that background makes it easier for him to have kind of a persona split, which is what I meant when I said the difference between reading something as you are the writer of it and reading something as a reader / performer of it. And I've had this conversation with lots of people since I started Dear Listener, with like the loud, shouty, sweary host persona that I have and very much enjoy. I pride myself on the fact that as long as people aren't being offensive, they can pretty much say whatever they want and phrase it however they want, and no one's going to tell them off for it. But I distinctly remember my own mum, bless her heart, saying, how you are when you're hosting Dear Listener is how you should be more, like, all the time. and after she'd said it, I said, do you know how exhausting it is to be that person for 2 hours? Like it's a lot of work to be that loud for that long.
I don't know about anybody else, but I suspect that for the most part, writers in general, poets and writers in general, are not loud people. I'm certainly not in my private life. I'm quiet. I'm fairly,
Get off.
I'm usually quite quiet, but you'd never believe it.
No.
When I head up behind the mic, because it's another side of yourself, I think, that comes forward.
We used to have a saying when I worked on wards. For those who don't know, I worked in mental health for many, many years, inpatient care. And we used to talk about putting the uniform on, which used to baffle a few people because we used nurse in civvies, but it was game face on. You are Mr. and Mrs. Muz psyche nurse for the next 7.5, 8 hours.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think a lot of performers or a lot of readers have that, or should work towards that if they're just starting out. Oh, we've got this far without any terrible questions or embarrassing ones.
I won't.
No, whatever it is, Tim, sit on it.
As long as you didn't tell me to swivel.
Does anyone have any questions
what's been
about?
your most?
Oh, sorry. Go on, Ange.
I was just going to say, well, okay then. What's been your most embarrassing moment during this past year?
Pick just one. I honestly don't know. I don't know that I've had any. Oh God, I might be speaking too soon. I've still got a month left. But I don't know if I've had any real cock-ups over the last year. Not that I can think of.
Good.
I think I might have got through it without embarrassing myself. The time before that is an entirely different matter. But no, I think I've managed to skate through without embarrassing myself, and I hope without embarrassing anyone else as well. So no, in that respect, it's been quite a successful year. I can at least breathe easy on that front. Although I suppose that's a question that you could direct to the Litfest committee, because they will no doubt let you know whether I've had any embarrassing moments. We might all be ready to head off and have our tea, unless Tim has a question.
No, not really.
No.
I was just thinking what else to ask. Actually,
nothing that you want to say.
I've got a question. If you want to have a sort of rounding off one, what would you say to the next Poet Laureate? Have you got any tips or anything like that?
Do whatever you want. Honestly, the last year has had so many high points through Barefaced Cheek alone. And do you know, Polly and I swapped sunflower poems, and suddenly we were doing a whole anthology of it. I found out what the National Poetry Day competition was, and suddenly it seemed a really good idea to have a whole book of anonymous poems. And just honestly, if it seems like a good idea, just have a go at it. Because I've been really fortunate to work on some really wonderful projects. Less fortunate that COVID-19 has taken about 3 months off me in terms of more projects. But I think use it to your advantage, because there are also some things that I've been invited to do just because I've been Worcestershire Poet Laureate. So visiting the Grange, for example, they asked me in as Worcestershire Poet Laureate, and using that title to be able to do things like that has been lovely. Because the real point of what they actually said when they contacted me was that they really wanted to be able to invite a young Worcestershire Poet Laureate, not young as in the young Worcestershire Poet Laureate, but young as in a younger Worcestershire Poet Laureate, so they could show their year 4s, 5s, 6s that if you want to write stories when you grow up, that's actually a valid career choice. You know, being able to use it for stuff like that has just been wonderful, and I'll really miss that part of the role. So yeah, use it to your advantage and do whatever you want, and be kind to Martin.
One last one for me, Charlie.
Yes, Tim.
What do you intend to do now? Besides having a good rest, I expect, on your half work. But you know, what do you think you'll sort of? What line do you think you'll take?
I'm writing another novel, which I want finished before the summer is out. I have a Worcestershire Poet Laureate collection to put together with Polly, with Polly's help. So that's on the horizon. I started as writer in residence at the Swan Theatre, and again, that's another thing that hasn't come to fruition because the world stopped turning for a while. But we will be looking to kind of liaise further and try and get some plans in place, even if they are digital plans, for the foreseeable future. And that's it, really. Nothing much.
Do you think there will be more poets applying for the competition now that the deadline has been extended, Charlie?
I certainly hope so. Yeah, I certainly hope that people use that to their advantage, because obviously the competition is now open until the 30th of June, I think, if memory serves right. So people actually have quite a while to get their entries in. And I think with everything that's happened in the world, we should learn to take more good chances. So when I say learn to take more chances, I don't mean drink all of the gin at once. But you know, if you think that there is something that you might like to have a go at, then surely this is kind of like the kick up the proverbial to
I'll end up singing like Rod Stewart.
maybe not have a go at everything, Tim.
No.
Yeah, so I certainly hope that there will be more poets who use the extended deadline to their advantage, because it's a really good opportunity, and it's a nice thing to have done. So I would recommend people doing it. And I blindly chucked my hat into the ring, not thinking for a second that I'd get it. So these things really do come good if you just give them the chance to. So yeah, fingers crossed there will be more submissions arriving in the LitFest inbox over the next 6 weeks ish. I hope anyway. And then we can all get judging, because I will form part of the judging panel for the next one.
Oh.
Yeah, hard taskmaster. This has been really lovely, just to sit and have a chat, more so than anything else. But thank you for asking wonderful questions as well.
Good.
One last one. Dear listener, you say you got that on Zoom?
Yes, we did a quiet one. Oh my God, why do I keep forgetting the days? We did a quiet one on Thursday.
Yeah.
But we're trying to get into the rhythm of doing them. I feel like every couple of weeks has been kind of where we're at, even if it's just for like the social aspect of it. There is a group for it, Tim, if you would like me to add you to it.
Yeah, because I normally do the Abbey Road on a Thursday, every Thursday, but that's every Thursday.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just wouldn't mind sort of doing other groups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can add you into the Dear Listener group, and then you'll see all of the Zoom invitations, because that's where they get posted.
Yeah.
For security.
Yeah, there was another thing actually that someone brought up, is the microphones. On the PCs, and that not always that clear. But you can get one of these ones that sort of catch on to the or shirt or something like that, and they reckon it does enhance the sound a bit better to the other readers and listeners.
Oh, okay.
It's only about £6 or something like that. But I'm going to have a look at it anyway and see what it's like. But,
truthfully, I don't know that people at Dear Listener need to be louder.
It just gives a better sound quality. I mean, I might need it.
Sometimes some of us need a contraption that does the opposite.
That's what the mute button's for.
Yeah, that's why you have control of the mute button, Charlie.
Yeah. Although I do think that I'm one of the people that could probably do with the microphone that goes in the opposite direction sometimes. This has been really lovely, so thank you all very much for coming. I will